Welcome. My name is Jody Craner, and I'm with the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us for today's webinar, The Power of Virtual Experiences, Raising Awareness of the Impact of Dementia. Our presenters are all dementia care specialists. Kathy Glaser and Jennifer Harders are from the Aging and Disability Resource Center of Waukesha County, and Jake Sawyers is from the Aging and Disability Resource Center from Walworth County. We're going to begin with the presentation, and then after the presentation is done, we'll open it up for discussions and questions. However, feel free to put any thoughts and questions in the chat as we go along, and then we'll get to them after the presentation. Now it's my pleasure to turn the webinar over to Kathy, Jennifer, and Jake, who will actually introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Harders. As Jody said, I am one of the dementia care specialists here in Waukesha County at the Aging and Disability Resource Center.
And I'm Kathy Glaser. I'm the other dementia care specialist here in Waukesha County. I also was a dementia care specialist in Ozaukee County prior to this. So some of what we talk about might be my experience here, and some might be my experience in Ozaukee County. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
And my name is Jake Sawyers, and I'm the dementia care specialist in Walworth County.
Okay, we're going to get started. So we're going to talk about as Jody said, the power of a virtual experience. And you'll see that we're going to intertwine the experiences we've had with different groups. So there we go. So what is a virtual experience? We thought we would start by defining that for you. So a virtual experience, the individuals that go through these virtual experiences are able to gain understanding of what it might be like to have a form of dementia. They're actually immersed in this experience for a period of time, and we want them to have the experience of kind of living in that world. It's a time-limited experience, usually anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes that people are actually in the experience room. It's always voluntary, so we always talk to people about the experience, and it's something that they volunteer or sign up to do. The experience involves modifying senses, typically vision, hearing, and then tactile modification, especially with hands. So typically people wear glasses that limit their vision. They typically wear headphones that have noises, different kinds of noises that can serve as a distraction. And then they typically wear gloves that limit the full use of their hands or their fingers. We wanted to be clear that this is not virtual reality. Virtual reality typically involves goggles. It's typically computer generated. It's a three-dimensional experience. That's not what this is. It's actually a physical environment that people enter, and then they move through that room. So it's different than that virtual reality experience. So what are the key elements of that virtual experience? Typically, we have multiple rooms. There typically is a room or an area where we prepare people. We set out the gear. We provide some kind of general or basic instructions about what the experience might be like for them, some of the rules, so to speak. We also provide each person with a task list. And those task lists are typically different, but we don't necessarily tell people that the task lists are different. And when we're providing the task list, we do it in a way that we know that they're not hearing absolutely everything on the list clearly. And there's a reason for that, which we'll talk about a little bit later. In the experience room, that's typically a separate room where we have everything set up and where the participants enter to complete their tasks. In the experience room, we typically have someone who's taking notes, making observations, how the individuals are experiencing the room, how they're reacting, how they're interacting with each other, how successful they're doing as far as completing their tasks. After the experience room, we pull people out of that room and we have an area where we debrief or we talk about that experience. We talk about feelings, thoughts, how it felt to be in that experience, and we make that connection then to what it might be like to have dementia. We also provide resources. Often we're sending people home with written information for additional information, or if they want to further their understanding about the disease or other resources that might be available. The groups that the three of us have used these experiences with are listed on this slide, and we're now going to take a little bit of time defining each of these groups and why the experience might be beneficial with each of them.
Really, right out of the gate, I don't unmute myself. First responders. We know that when first responders see people living with dementia, they're often in crisis. So by first responders, we're talking about police, fire, EMT, crisis staff. And often those situations involve a lot of people and are very chaotic. And those behaviors that people living with dementia are displaying may seem threatening to first responders or very confusing. They may have a hard time trying to figure out why somebody is reacting in the way that they are and what their response should be. We know that people have a hard time following directions when they are confused and in crisis, and escalation can happen very quickly. So we want first responders to be participating in something like this because we want them to see things through a different lens. We also know that first responders and crisis staff are often called to facilities with the intention of having someone leave the facility, that the staff would like them to be transported somewhere. Unfortunately, if a person is not having a medical emergency, there is no good place to transport someone. So we want people to be able to de-escalate those situations and to respond in a way that dials things down, slows down the situation that's happening for the family, for the person living with, for other people that are involved in it, and minimizes risk for everyone. We also always remember that first responders are working in these fields because they want to help others. I am not in the mode of bashing police, first responders, EMTs, anybody that is out doing their job and doing the best they can. Our hope is that this helps them do the best they can in a new way and see things through a different lens. So that's why we reach out to first responders with these experiences. Jen, you're going to have to advance the slide, I think.
Bear with me 1 minute. I'm trying to get this to move.
If you have your keyboard, you can do the little arrows.
Yeah, I'm trying, Jody. That's not working, and I can't get the arrows to come up at the bottom.
Are they at the top?
No. Okay. There we go.
So within the long-term care facilities, we're kind of looking at in terms of the staff with the caregivers. We know that a large percentage of the residents that are going to be within these facilities have some form of dementia. And so this is just a really good way for, not only education, but just to get the care staff to kind of create a more compassionate or empathetic style of care. For a lot of people, when we think of dementia, we really just think of memory loss. And so this is one of the best ways to understand that it really affects, like kind of what Jen said, is this simulation affects all of our sensory input. And so this is a great way of getting kind of firsthand experience of those delays and that kind of disruption within our sensory input and how that can affect within just those 5-10 minutes that we're there. It's also a really good way of getting a better understanding of certain behaviors. We know when behaviors occur, especially in facilities like this, we are moving sometimes at a mile a minute. And so it could be just a small behavior, but it can really disrupt the caregiver's kind of day, if you will. And so it's a good way to kind of get an understanding of why they're doing some of those certain behaviors, because it could be just the fact that they're bored or that they don't know what to do next. And then with these kind of enlightenment, if you will, is that it really helps to understand we really need to slow things down. A lot of our different, hospitals and facilities are really, we're taught to try to be as fast as possible. But when it comes to dementia, we really need to just slow things down and get to their speed. And then
So when we're talking about family caregivers, what we often see is these individuals have difficulty understanding the impact of dementia. As we know, when someone has dementia, they may look normal, right? They may look like the same person. They may even act the same at certain times of day. They may have good days and bad days. So their abilities can vary over time and from day to day. And so it's often hard for caregivers, for family caregivers, to really understand truly what's going on for that person. What's happening in their brain? Why do their abilities vary? Why do they seem more restless or agitated at times? And often we'll hear caregivers say, well, it's just manipulation. They're just manipulating. Or they just want me to take care of them. So they're not doing things they could. They just want other people to do those things for them. And by using this experience with them, it helps them understand some of that behavior and why those abilities can vary over time. It really helps them understand how people living with dementia understand the world around them, what impacts them, as far as noises and things that we say and do. It also helps them have more realistic expectations. So because that person may seem normal, or they may have things that they can do that they used to be able to do, often as family members, we continue to have these expectations of them that aren't realistic. So it helps family caregivers understand how to modify those expectations to help that person really be as independent as they can be. We know with dementia that often the person has changes in how they communicate. The difficulty with getting my thoughts out into words can be challenging at times. And we know that it can take up to 20 seconds for someone living with dementia to get their thoughts out, as well as understanding communication from others. Depending on where the damage is in the brain, the messages, the communication they're getting from other people may just seem like a garbled mess. So having difficulty with that. We also know for family caregivers, especially if it's a husband and wife, people who have relied on each other and kind of balanced out the roles or the expectations of a household, that these changes can be real challenging. So trying to come to terms with why I might need to pick up more of the slack with my spouse, or that role reversal for parent and child. It just really, these experiences really help people understand what it might be like for that person. And then we can work with them to adjust their approaches and their expectations.
So when we talk about students, and we'll kind of get into it in terms of my experience with it, but we here in Walworth County, we've done it with high school students as well as college age students. So we're really looking at, the later stages of education. Definitely not. We're not talking about kind of middle school or younger. But when it comes to this, it's the simulation itself is a great, hands-on educational experience. So it's not only am I, discussing dementia with them, but they're actually able to get a, hands-on experience and kind of experience it. It's a really great lesson for empathy and compassion. And I know we mentioned that before, but with the long-term care facilities, but it really is important for us to try to bring back empathy and compassion to the caregiving role. I think that's super, super important. It's able to bring awareness to future sectors of the workforce. So a lot of times when we do the simulation, some of the students that go through it are not students that are planning on going into a world of healthcare or going into the long-term care facilities. And so this is just a really great way to kind of plant that seed for when they are maybe entrepreneurs or business owners in the future. They can understand, the importance of making sure that their staff or the customers that they interface with, that they are understanding a little bit more about dementia. I've learned that for a lot of the different students, or for the younger generation, they necessarily haven't been told or educated about the baby boomers and how we are going to have the first time in civilian history where the non-working population is actually going to be larger than the working population. And so this is sometimes, I don't like to use wake up call, but sometimes a wake up call for these students to understand that even though I'm not going into the healthcare field, dementia probably will interact with me within my workforce in some capacity, if not for my future awareness for, neighbors, family, or things of that nature. Another really great way is, I know, especially at least in Walworth County and Elkhorn, they have been really pushing for our students to learn advocacy and how to advocate. And so this is a great way for them to kind of get hands-on experiences to start advocating for, a population of people that really need some advocacy because they can't necessarily speak for themselves. And so they are able to either kind of the businesses that they frequent, or even possibly the grocery stores, convenience stores that they actually work at, about getting them to be dementia friendly. And then kind of the last one is it encourages students to think about a career in the kind of the caregiving workforce, whether that is actually, going on to get their CNA and maybe their LPN and become an RN, or even the big one is understanding that for a lot of people, this is kind of a side job of doing caregiving on the side with their future role. And as we all know, there's a huge caregiver shortage. So if we can try to introduce the next generation of understanding the major importance and benefits that can come with caregiving, we know about kind of the downside of it, but there are a lot of really positive things too, like teaching empathy and compassion, even for maybe some of those younger students. It's a great way to understand time management skills and things of that nature. So really introducing them to that idea of maybe this is something I would look forward to working in, not necessarily full-time, but even a side job or volunteering.
And that's a perfect segue to talk about local businesses. We like to have local businesses think about doing some kind of virtual simulation related to dementia, to think about what that would be like in their business. We tell businesses all the time, statistics tell us some of your customers have dementia. They might very well know who is having changes in their memory or their ability to transact business, or some are kind of surprised by that. But when we're thinking of 1 in 9 people over 65, 1 in 3 people over 85, that's a big chunk of our population, and they are doing business. We also know that people are living at home with dementia. When we talk about dementia or Alzheimer's, people automatically think about people living in a nursing home or assisted living, but we know that's not the case. That their estimates are probably about 75% of the people are living at home. And of those, a big chunk are living alone. So they are out transacting business in our local communities all the time. And we want them to be able to do that. We want them to go to places they're used to going to. We want them to go places where staff knows them and they're familiar with how they can do their grocery shopping, what teller they talk to at the bank, whatever the case might be. We want businesses to be able to be our first safety net if people are being scammed or having an issue, because we know that that is so huge. It might be somebody that has dementia. It might be someone that just has fallen victim to a scam, but we want local businesses to have that on their radar. We also want people to be independent. And so that idea of knowing your customer and knowing what they're doing and seeing if it's different or not is important. I might wander around the grocery store in a haphazard way, and that's how I've always done it, as opposed to going up and down each aisle. But if it's the opposite and I'm doing something different, somebody who's known me for a long time might realize, that's a little bit different. I'm going to make a note to myself and see if things are okay. We also know this is good customer service. This doesn't have to be above and beyond, because this is customer service. People with cognitive challenges, it might not be, again, a dementia diagnosis, but they're struggling, and we want to be able to help them, and we want to be able to do so in a respectful way. So whether someone is having mental health changes, whether someone is having more confusion for some other reason, we want businesses to be able to respond, just like Jake has said, compassionately and with empathy. We also know that they need new approaches, because they know who their frequent flyers are. They know who they see sometimes on a daily basis, and they might need to think about, what does that look like and how is that different in their approach or the amount of support that they provide. We also know that they might have staff, volunteers, or family members that are either having cognitive changes themselves or are caring for someone who is. And so that just is a whole other piece of businesses needing to pay attention to dementia-friendly communities and what dementia might look like in their setting, what someone living with dementia might struggle with in their environment, and how they can improve that on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. The last group that we wanted to talk about are faith-based organizations. And the reason that these experiences can be so important for this group is because we know that when we're talking about a faith service, a type of service, there typically is a routine to it. There typically is acceptable behavior and unacceptable behavior, and people generally are able to follow along and be part of that service. And when somebody is having some changes that are impacting their cognition, we know that those folks will have difficulty following the service. They may have difficulty finding hymns, scriptures, knowing which book. Is it the hymnal? Is it the Bible? Is there another reference that they need to be following along in? And that becomes problematic for people. We also know, as I said, there's acceptable behavior and unacceptable behavior oftentimes in these types of environments. And sometimes people may behave in inappropriate ways during a service. Maybe they're talking, maybe they're asking for some help, maybe they're standing when they should be sitting, or vice versa. Maybe they're getting up and moving around the environment because they're confused and they need some redirection. So navigating the environment can be challenging. Navigating the service can be challenging. As Kathy said, we know that a majority, 75% of people living with dementia are in the community, and a significant number of those folks are living by themselves. And so they may be going still to their church service or their faith-based service on a daily or weekly basis by themselves, and they'll need some additional support. Common practices within that service can be forgotten. I have communion noted here, but even some other practices within the service or before or after the service could be problematic for people. And then the impact on other members. If that person is talking or if they're moving around in a way that is disruptive, that can be disruptive to the people around them. And we know that if the congregation members or the faith-based organization doesn't have the training or the knowledge to how to help these people, often the individuals begin to pull away from that experience, from that service that has been so significant in their lives, and become even more isolated, living by themselves. Transportation is an issue because oftentimes as the disease progresses, people are unable to drive. And if they live independently and are unable to find transportation, they're missing those services, again, that have been so very important in their lives. And so it can lead to isolation and then a complete loss of connection from that faith-based organization. So that's why that's so important to this group.
As much as we want people to be participating in these experiences and gaining more understanding, there are times that we hesitate to encourage people to participate. And that is true if people have cognitive changes. If someone is already experiencing the impact of dementia, we would not put them through something that would be more challenging to them and potentially more anxiety producing or somewhat disrespectful from the standpoint of they're already having these changes. Why are we making it worse for them to understand what it would be like to have these changes? We also pay attention if people have a lot of anxiety or if they have some changes such as balance issues, impaired mobility that makes moving around or standing challenging. We might say someone could observe as opposed to participate if that would be their choice. Seizure disorders is another thing that people have brought up that could be an issue, and we certainly don't want to do anything that would be triggering for someone. Also, when we're thinking about that limiting the experience and family caregivers, we do talk to them about it being an emotional experience or that it can be. So we give them more time. We think a little bit about that and let them know that it might be more challenging for them to experience as someone who is presently caring for someone with dementia. Although, as Jen said, a very valuable tool. We just want to give them a heads up early on. The other thing that we wanted to talk about today was ways that we can alter these experiences for different groups of people. Jen and I had the privilege in July of working with the Office on Deaf of Hard of Hearing, persons who are deaf and hard of hearing, to put on their first Dementia Day, which was part of the BOLD grant, and was this fabulous experience for us to be able to work with people that are deaf and hard of hearing and also people from that department, because we learned a ton as far as what might make an experience like this meaningful to their participants. When we talked about partnering with them and what a Dementia Day would look like, and we talked about the availability of a virtual experience, they were very interested in exploring that with us, but we had to make changes because part of it is people's hearing being altered, and we already know that that's an issue. And we wanted to make it be the changes that would be different for someone who's deaf or hard of hearing as they're going through dementia. So we did have people wear headphones because they felt like just the feeling of having headphones on, and also possibly the vibrations that people were feeling would be worthwhile. We worked with interpreters and had 2 different interpreters giving instructions, alternating from one side to the other. We read it, and then the interpreters signed it. People didn't realize that they should be looking from one interpreter to the next, and so that caused them to miss part of the instructions, which is kind of what happens for hearing individuals when we're giving instructions, that they hear bits and pieces of that. We also know that giving instructions is relatively fast with no repetition, and that was hard for volunteers or interpreters, as it is for our volunteers, to not help people more. But we did explain that that's part of the experience. Giving things in a fast manner, maybe more information than a person can take in at once, and that we would talk about that afterward and what that might mean for someone living with dementia. We also knew we needed to create other distractions since we didn't have the changes in sound. So we had more people moving through the room, moving things in the room. And we thought about having flashing lights or being able to do things. We weren't able to do that in the environment we were in, but that was one suggestion that they had. We also had people have cell phones in their pocket that we rang, so they vibrated in their pocket as another distraction. Probably the biggest thing that lessons that we learned from that are that we need to have people from that are having those experiences. So folks from the deaf and hard of hearing community participate in planning and thoughts on how to modify something that would be appropriate. We know that that people will be angry and that it will be frustrating. That in our instructions in advance, we probably need to be more clear on that. We're going to be telling you things one time and one time only, and then we'll talk about that after, or more clearly articulating when they were signing the instructions in advance what that would be. We also know that we want to be careful of how we're advertising things so that people know what they are signing up for, and that they're clear on that. We certainly did give people the opportunity to opt out if once they learned more about the experience, they were not interested in participating. And one of the sessions we had as a live session. So there were about 120 people, I think, at this, 130 people at this event. We had 2 sets of people in a separate area going through the virtual experience. And one of those we had broadcast into the main room for everyone to see because not everyone was able to participate. And then we had those folks that participated come back to the main room and do a debrief up on the stage with everyone to talk about what that was like and have people be able to ask questions about the hows and whys and what did it feel like and what was their impact or experience and what might that mean for someone that they're caring for in their own lives.
So as Kathy kind of just mentioned, that was very similar to kind of my experience with the students. So the biggest thing that we first learned was when you're working with students, you're definitely going to have some shy kids that aren't necessarily interested in doing the simulation as well as kind of the debrief aspect. So some of the big alterations we made were just kind of, the teacher helped me to really find some of the kind of the stronger leader type of students to actually physically go through the simulation. And then it was a kind of an education for the rest of the students to become our observers or our recorders, who are usually kind of part of the team that's putting on the simulation. And so they were located on the side of the room. And after the actual simulation completed, just as kind of Kathy just mentioned, we were able to bring those students who did go through it to the front of the room. And then the kids that were observing were able to kind of interact and ask questions of, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? It was also a really great experience in terms of kind of seeing someone who doesn't have dementia, it's their classmate, and then seeing them have similar behaviors to either a grandparent of theirs or someone that's been within their kind of their grocery store. And it was a big kind of, you saw the light bulb come on for some of the kids of really seeing, whoa, this really does make a huge difference. Another big thing that we had to kind of alter is we reduced our time that is in the simulation, just because we had to make sure that we were working within their bell schedules and making sure that we could still have a really solid debrief section. And then kind of the slack part here of saying that we definitely had a couple students who, kind of put on a show, if you will. And we're really just going through the motions, not really understanding the experience anymore, but maybe just trying to make a friend laugh, which honestly actually was a great lesson during that debrief of talking about how humor is such a solid defense mechanism. And that and actually two of the different girls that were in kind of the observers who were CNAs talked about how they had residents who they kind of understood a little bit more of why that person might have been doing all of those kind of goofy things they do, is that they might just be really confused and really stuck in what's going on. So they just want to make someone else smile. We know that humor is one of the best ways to, form trust with somebody. And when it comes to dementia, that's what we're constantly trying to do, right? Is just keep building trust with another individual. So a lot of the alterations we made were very similar to what Kathy kind of described, but a lot of it came through as well with the debrief, just because, sometimes it's pulling teeth to get teenagers to open up about different emotions and things of that. So it was really big in terms of making sure we were prepared on the facilitator side of knowing, what things that we want to point out, as well as what questions to ask. And I think that's on my next slide and I'm jumping ahead. So I apologize there.
Okay, so in terms of the debrief, these are some of the questions that we'll ask people when they come out of that experience. We want to know how they felt. How did it feel to be in that room, to not be able to understand what you were being told or asked to do, to not be able to ask for those questions again? And we talk about what behaviors they exhibited. As I said earlier, a significant part of this experience is someone in that room writing things down. What are the observations? How do people behave? Were they able to complete their tasks? And oftentimes people will want to know in that debrief, well, how did I do? What were my tasks again? They're asking for some reassurance in that. We often see people shadow one another, or as Jake was just talking about, kind of that use of humor where they'll try and engage someone else, which we know comes out of confusion and anxiety of not being able to perform. We talked to them about the sensory alteration. What was that like for you? And then really what our goal is of this debrief session is to link how that person felt with what it might be like to have dementia. So you felt this way. This is why somebody living with dementia may be upset at times. This is their experience. Another thing that we point out is, as Kathy said, sometimes people get really frustrated by the experience. They get really frustrated that we're not clear with what the task list is. And so we will point out, this is time limited. This was 5 or 10 minutes of your life. Imagine what it would be like if this was your all day, every day, because that's often what it's like for people living with dementia, where they're not getting clear instructions. We're not communicating with them in ways that help them understand. We're also not modifying the environment to make it less confusing for people. And then we tie that back to, how can we change? We know that people living with dementia, as the disease progresses, they can't change, but we can. As caregivers, as people working in businesses, as people in their faith community, we can change our behavior to help support people living with dementia. And we really drill down to those things in that debriefing session.
So our first responder debriefing, the first comment we often hear is, we're doing it wrong, or that's not what we were trained to deal with. And I get that. It is not what people going into law enforcement are thinking they're going to be doing, that they're going to be going to a home or a facility and dealing with someone that has cognitive changes and de-escalate them. But that is what is happening. And so we know when people call 911 or people call for emergency care of some kind, that we need to have thoughtful responders that can interpret what they're seeing. We have also often heard people saying the fact that their hearing is compromised really threw them. And that was interesting from the standpoint of they are used to using that sense to pick up extra things while they're paying attention to other things. So that ability to multitask. And we know it's very hard for people living with dementia, if not impossible, to multitask. So if multiple things are happening in somebody's background, multiple people are talking, it is not going to go well. If the television is blaring at the same time somebody is trying to give instructions they would like someone to follow, it's not going to go well. We also often have had them talk about frequent flyers that they see, that they immediately say, oh my gosh, I wonder if this is what's happening with so-and-so. And that is really a great opportunity to kind of debrief with them. What do those calls look like? Where do they come from? What might that be? One of the most successful ones I could think of is that we were talking about what someone might see and how it might be different than what they are expecting. And some people from Port Washington, some of the officers said they got called every night from this woman who said there was someone standing in her window with his arms outraised, like in a threatening manner. And when they got there, they could not see anything. And so they provided a lot of reassurance and they walked around the house and such. And finally, after many visits, somebody saw what this woman had seen, which was the trellis, the garden trellis of the neighbor that was reflected by the street light. So it only happened certain times of day because that's when that shadow came through her room. But it was great that they were able to do that. Eventually, thankfully, the neighbor ended up moving that trellis, so that helped that situation. But we also think, okay, are there blinds that could be closed? Are there sounds that somebody is considering to be more threatening? You know, what does that look like for them helping to reassure someone and de-escalate things instead of put somebody in a car, ambulance, whatever the case might be, and take them somewhere? We also know if first responders have good training and caregivers have good experience calling and having somebody come and talk them through things, that they'll do that. And that's exactly what we want to do. We want to have somebody that a caregiver can call to help talk things down. Ideally, it would be somebody else in their support circle, but sometimes it might be 911. So if those people know something about this person, what they like to be called, what some of their interests are, how they're going to make a connection with them, Those are the things we talk about in debriefs with first responders. Those are also the things that first responders can talk about to facility staff, because unfortunately, in this day and age that we live, first responders might have more training working with someone with dementia than someone working in a facility. And that just is how it is right now. And so if they can demonstrate de-escalation and helping someone feel safe in their environment and relaxed, and again, feel like this is where they're supposed to be and their home, wherever home is, and feel secure, that's really what we want to have happen.
So with the debrief with our kind of our long-term care facility staff, kind of like what Kathy just said in terms of the frequent flyers, it's really common for kind of staff to acknowledge either the behaviors that they did, or if they were kind of watching other people go through, is seeing how it can correlate exactly to a person that they've cared for, either currently in their facility or someone in their past. And it can really be, like I said, those light bulb moments. And that's really what the simulations are all about, is creating those light bulb moments, and understanding why they might have been doing that specific behavior or vice versa. I think the biggest thing, and kind of like what Kathy was kind of getting at too, is a lot of our care staff our facilities can't always provide the best education. And so sometimes when you're around this world so much, you kind of think that it's basic knowledge, that we're supposed to slow things down, that we're supposed to try to use smaller phrases and things of that nature. And it can be, especially if you've been working in a care facility for years, you can kind of forget about those different things. And so a lot of times, that most frustrating part, as Jen had mentioned beginning, is that they don't get all of the information of all of the tasks that they're supposed to do. And so this is the best way to really hone in and saying, this is exactly why we want to go task by task, movement by movement, and really break down kind of how we're communicating. Just because if we were able to kind of redo the simulation, right, and have the person that's going through it be able to communicate slower and actually going through what needs to be done, odds are they're able to get all of their tasks completed. And finally, I think the biggest one, especially for those that are able to go through like the full 8 to 10 minutes, odds are they're either one, going to forget what all of their tasks are, or just right away boredom just ensues. And so it's kind of like, what am I supposed to do? So boredom can present itself in a wide array of different people, whether that's just they sit down and they just decide to wait until you know until the time's over, or maybe they get involved with some of the other activities that we have within the simulation. I know on our end, we always have a bunch of different white towels, just because it's fascinating how many people will flock to folding towels when they don't know what to do, and that they want to be helpful, and this is what we're going to do. And that's sometimes one of the best lessons, is if we have somebody that is in our facility that looks bored, maybe we just need to give them something to do. We need to provide them a purpose. And as we know, towels is sometimes just one of those great, easy things to do. So it can really turn the idea of understanding a small activity can feel like it's not a big deal, but it can actually be providing a lot of really good engagement for that person. And it could be fulfilling kind of some of that boredom that they might be going through. Hey, Jen, I'm not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. What we see with family caregivers when we debrief with them once they've gone through the experience is that kind of like what Jake was talking about, like that aha moment we see. They have a greater understanding of the impact of dementia. They go from thinking that the person that they're caring for is doing things on purpose to irritate them or wanting them to be taken care of, to understanding why that person may not be doing things that they used to be able to do. We talk with caregivers about right sizing activities or tasks. Again, kind of like what Jake was just talking about with towel folding, is really talking about how can Instead of thinking my loved one can no longer do X, Y, or Z task, thinking about, okay, well, maybe they can do a portion of that. Maybe if you set them up, maybe one of the things that I've talked with caregivers about is meal preparation, or what happens around mealtime. And caregivers will often say, well, he or she can't do anything anymore. And I will challenge that and say, well, what about setting the table? Oh, well, she'll never be able to remember where all the plates and cups are. Well, how about if you set them out on the counter, and then ask them to move them to the area where you're going to eat. So again, just talking through how to right size tasks, how to help your loved one be as independent as they can be and as involved as they can be. We also talk about behaviors as a form of communication. All behaviors for a person living with dementia is a form of communication, and it's up to us to figure out what they're trying to tell us. As the disease progresses and the person is no longer able to process information and articulate thoughts and needs, they will begin to communicate in how they behave. So helping the caregiver step back and think about what that experience was like. What were some of the behaviors that they expressed during the experience, and how that can be related to their person living with dementia. We also talk about realistic expectations. As the disease progresses, we have to adjust our expectations of what that person is able to do, and how our support needs to increase. So we talk about that. We talk about effective communication. As we've talked about, when we're giving those tasks, it is our goal to have them not completely understand everything. And we talk about that and how we have to modify how we're communicating with a person living with dementia. Maybe we need to make sure that we have eye contact with them and that they are paying attention to what we're saying. Maybe we need to give them one step of a task at a time. We are the ones that need to modify that. We talk to caregivers about the importance of asking for help. There is a quote that talks about being a caregiver for someone living with dementia is a marathon, not a sprint. And so we'll talk to caregivers about how stressful and intense this whole experience can be, and how important it is to get other people involved. And we'll talk about planning for the future. Maybe their loved one is early in the disease process and they are still pretty independent. We will have the conversations about, okay, this is an irreversible progressive disease. So what are some of the things that you can put in place or plan for as the disease progresses? And people are more willing to have those conversations oftentimes after this experience.
So, like we said, when it comes to the students, I really think that the debrief is the bigger lesson than the actual simulation aspect. And it's definitely the biggest lesson when it comes to learning, empathy and compassion. I think that the student generation right now has been a big they've been a huge aspect in terms of how mental health is something that we can talk about kind of very freely now. And so it's something that I think it hits home a little bit more, but it is when we're talking about students, we're really kind of pulling. It's not necessarily that we're going to get, one in terms of all of the students to really engage, as well as necessarily putting some of those different pieces together. So it's a big aspect in terms of the facilitator, as well as I kind of help. I'm lucky enough that when I've done it, I've had teachers in the room too, to try to really pull out, key moments and kind of highlight those and talk about those different scenarios that have played out. As we mentioned, when we do it, we have the students kind of come up front, and then we're able to have, an aspect of, maybe we had a student who had gone back to the same pair of pants 4 times and they didn't know why, and we're able to ask them why. And sometimes the student can tell you they didn't know what to do. Sometimes we even have situations where the students go, I did. I had no, I guess I didn't even realize that. I thought I only went there once. And it can really just, like we said, those light bulb moments. Um, and then finally, like with the Elkhorn students, is that advocacy is something that they've been really trying to push. So is kind of putting that call to action into some of the students' hands. Is okay, now that we know all of this, what are you guys going to do with that information? If it's somebody that has a grandparent at home, they know how to engage with them a little bit better. If it's somebody that's a CNA, they know how to do their work better. For some of the students, though, they might not have, that's not part of their world yet, and so maybe they are going to advocate to the business that they work for, or those different places that they frequent, to try to make sure that we make some more dementia friendly trainings. I think, as I said, I really highlight with the students the fact that their generation really was so important in terms of us being able to freely talk about mental health. And so kind of putting that on their plate, is talking about this is something that they can also kind of champion. They get really excited about. And so I've had opportunities where the students are the ones that helped bring together businesses that are looking to get trained and things of that. So it's something that I think is really, really vital. But the biggest thing that I would say is that the debrief is one of the most important parts with the students.
And that thought of local businesses getting trained because somebody suggested they get trained is a great idea. Jake, thanks for bringing that up, talking about students working at businesses. I've also had caregivers talk to businesses to say, it's a struggle for us to be here. It would be great if your staff got some training, because people living with dementia often can say where they're not welcome. They might not say why or what happened, but they know that they're not welcome there, or that they are welcome there, that people want them to be there. So when we're talking to local businesses during that debrief, we definitely talk about that. We talk about how they would handle certain situations. What does it look like in your business? I often say I've been someone's favorite and least favorite person in the span sometimes of 20 minutes. So sometimes it's a new face. What does it look like if somebody's having a hard time with a teller or a cashier, for somebody else to step in and be that, this is somebody who can help you. I'm sorry, I don't know that. This is an expert, and be able to do that, hand that off in a business one way or the other. And also, what might it be about their environment that might make it harder for people with cognitive changes to be in their environment? Is the music blaring? Are the floors glaring? Is there way too much clutter all over the place that people are having to navigate around? Do they switch where things are all the time? I don't have dementia, but that ticks me off when I'm used to things being in a certain spot and stores decide they're going to change them to make things more interesting, I guess. But it's hard when people are trying to function basically on autopilot and get their business done for it to be different. We also know that we need to thank businesses that are going the extra mile and are doing that. And so we do try to do that in public ways, to say we are grateful for these different businesses doing that. We recently had a bank in the area have us be part of their commercial, or mention us during part of their commercial, that their staff had been trained to work with people living with dementia by the ADRC. And that was a great unexpected commercial that was on the air. So that was nice, because anytime we see that, then hopefully that increases the ripple, right? If this business got trained and there are other people in their sector, maybe they would want to also. We do a lot of training with local libraries, because we have memory cafes in many of our local libraries, and that is a space where people feel welcomed. And we want people to be in spaces where they feel comfortable and welcomed, and they can engage with people in positive ways. So we also try to provide resources, and we didn't talk about that a lot in this debriefing, but we try to give people things in writing to think about afterward, and to think about what that might look like. what quote unquote behaviors might look like or what they might mean, what it looks like when somebody is exhausted to be able to continue to push on and function. Does someone need just an opportunity to sit down? And what would that look like if they did that? And also that thought of working with caregivers and providing an empathetic response, not being impatient, not being intolerant of a couple being at this restaurant out for dinner, welcoming them, hopefully knowing them by name if it's that kind of place, talking about, what they might like or what specials there might be that they know. All these kinds of things make it easier for people living with dementia and their caregivers to be out and about and active in our community. And honestly, for anybody, because we really have an issue with social isolation in this country, and we need to have people out and about and connected in their business. So I don't need a business to diagnose people if they have dementia or not, but I need them to provide good customer service so people feel welcomed and known in their environment.
And lastly, talking about faith-based organizations, when we provided these experiences in churches or faith-based organizations, we often talk about that understanding of how significant the faith-based practices are for individuals, older adults, people living with dementia, and how that is a connection to the community. So it's so very important that those individuals be able to continue those practices. We talk about how to adapt the service, maybe making it a shorter service, maybe having a couple of pages of information that the person can follow along instead of having to use multiple books or multiple items to follow the service, just making it easier and more condensed for them. Talking about also how to support that person during the service. Can you partner that person with another member of the church or the organization? Can you have someone sit next to that person who can provide those subtle reminders or the assistance with navigating the environment, navigating the service, when to get up, when to sit down, how to get communion, those kinds of things. It makes, again, as we've said, people more empathetic and more understanding if they know what it might be like to have dementia. We also talk with these environments, business environments, faith-based environments, about environmental modifications. What are the changes that can be made that will help that person navigate, find their way around the environment easier? What does the signage look like? I did a business training or a training environmental review of a church in our area, and all the signs were hung from the ceiling as far as how to navigate and where different areas of the church were. And we talked about the visual changes for persons living with dementia and how it's likely that they wouldn't even see those signs. So the church got together and decided to change their signage in the church and put them more at eye level with that in mind. Also, helping others understand that that person is not intentionally doing things to disrupt them, but that they're really struggling with knowing what to do, that it's their confusion from their dementia. And that just helps them, that person living with dementia, feel more comfortable if they have individuals around them who are more understanding and more supportive, that that person isn't doing things wrong on purpose, that it is a result of the dementia that they're experiencing.
So in summary, we really are aware that these can be really powerful tools to bring these messages home to people about what the symptoms of dementia might feel like and what it might mean to them, to then impact them in how they move forward. When people have experienced those things personally, they get what an impaired peripheral visual field is. So if I have basically binocular vision and you come up to me from the side and tap on me, I'm probably going to be jumping because I don't see that you're there. If they had that experience, they might remember, I have to approach people from the front. I have to give people information slowly or in small pieces because that didn't help me when it wasn't like that. That might be that people realize they have tripping hazards or other things that they can deal with, all different kinds of things that they can want to learn more about, what it might look like, what it might mean for them, and also being more sympathetic to the symptoms of dementia. I say to people all the time, if I had cancer and my hair was falling out, nobody would blame me. But if I have dementia and I ask the same questions again and again, people are annoyed. And that's a symptom that we can't blame people for. It's a symptom that is just what it is. So when we're thinking about this, I want you to be cognizant of the fact that we're not selling a product or service. People can do the research on their own. There's a lot of options out there, and you can think about what that might mean to do some kind of simulation that will mimic some of those changes that people have as they move through dementia. Again, the important thing is to be clear in the debrief about why things were changed the way they were, what that might mean for people living with dementia, and what that also might mean for people that are living, working, and just existing with others in our communities. So thanks everybody for being here and being interested in learning more about why we think these are vital tools. We can take questions if people have questions. And then the next slide also is all of our contact information. So feel free to reach out to any of us with questions too.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, excuse me. Jennifer, can you bring down the PowerPoint so we get the Brady Bunch tiles? Thank you.
Okay. Hi guys, nice to see you all. I've been doing the virtual dementia tour here in Winnebago County for a little over a year, and we're doing it on a smaller scale just because of the size of the rooms that we have, and we're looking to kind of ramp it up a little bit this year. We're buying more of the glasses and the headphones and everything, and I'm just wondering, like, in terms of numbers that you have like put through at one given time, like what can you tell me a little bit about that in terms of what's been successful for kind of bringing it to larger groups?
I have a question. Are you asking how many people can go through the experience at one time, or how many as far as over a 2-hour period you can put people through?
You know, we give people a lot of time to debrief because we're working with a lot of caregivers. And so it's been important that we make sure that people have that opportunity to talk afterwards, because there is a lot of emotion we've learned, but we're looking at bringing it out into the community and maybe doing it at a conference or, at a business. And so wondering more about if you had a space that was larger, would you put 6 people, say, through at the same time? Or, we're just kind of wondering a little bit more. We usually right now are just putting through like 2 at a time and then debriefing. So it takes a long time, but just hoping to impact more people.
So as Kathy said, we're not selling any particular program, but we happen to use Dementia Live.
Okay.
And with 2 sets of the items, we can put 8 people through at a time if
Okay.
we have the space If we have enough people observing, you can do that.
Okay.
It can be challenging for sure. And that debrief is a little different then. But four typically at a time when we're doing the experience, but up to 8.
Okay. And then with 8, how many people are supporting it in terms of observing and debriefing? How many staff or volunteers do you have?
Usually at least 2 that are observing. Because if you're just doing 4, we would have 1 person. You could have 2 per group of 4 for sure. But it doesn't take as much manpower as some of the other programs that we've used in the past. Jake or Kathy, want to add to that?
If you were going to run a variety of people through, like if you were thinking about doing it somewhere, we could help you kind of figure out the logistics of that, because you know, kind of what each volunteer position could do, and you know, then what they could do to set it up for the next group, those kinds of things.
Okay.
But yeah, we like to have more than 2 go through at a time. 4 is kind of an ideal, because it's good to have a little bit of chaos in that room
Yeah.
and people doing different things. But yeah, probably 8 is a max for a debrief. You know, we did that group debrief as people were watching it, and that was okay. And we definitely had people had a lot of comments and questions afterwards. So if that's all that could happen, that would be okay. But yeah, that kind of is how we do it.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you very much.
I only have equipment for 4 people, so that's
Okay.
where we've always kind of been. But I will say, I know, like when we've done it with 4 and then we've tried to cycle people in as much as we can, it is difficult to, you know, when you have someone go through it and then they go into the debrief room, but the debrief hasn't started yet, they end
Yeah.
up kind of doing it on their own anyway, or it can take some time. So, like they kind of mentioned, that's kind of the hardest, the more difficult spot. I would also say that in terms of like when I've done it with the students and it's been a large group, sometimes I've been able to bring staff with me from the ADRC. Sometimes it's been me with the teachers, and I would just say the more people, definitely the more support you want to have, just because it can get
Yeah.
chaotic really quick. And then it's been nice. I know, you know, I know they kind of mentioned like having 4 or like a recorder to see, you know, the 4 different people. When we had it with the students, it made it good that we had sometimes like 2 or 3 recorders on one person, and so sometimes we were able to find like even the smallest little odd behavior just because we've got more than, you know, one set of eyes on somebody.
Okay. That's great. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, experiences people want to share with the group?
I guess I just want to make a comment about the power of this, in that when I went through the conference in July that you reference, it just reminded me the importance of using all aspects of the brain, or as many pieces of the brain, to learn something. And the virtual experience does that. It's very comparable to what I remember trying to learn the alphabet. When you learn the alphabet and you have to string 26 letters together in the order of them, how do you do that? You use that through the power of both sides of the brain with music, like the ABC, and you sing it. And that's what this experience does. It brings many parts of the brain to learn information and understanding and gain insight to the world of someone who may be experiencing and living with dementia. So it's very powerful. The other piece to this whole webinar today is appreciating that you can customize this to different populations to make it even more powerful to that population to understand and assist them. So it has a lot of avenues, and a lot of times we don't like to color outside the lines. And I think this made you think about, it's okay to color outside the lines and customize to populations, as long as you're saying true to what you're trying to accomplish. So I very much appreciate the presentation and doing that.
If there aren't any other questions, I guess we can sign off. Again, you have our emails, and Jody, I know, threw them in the chat too. So be in touch. Any of us would be willing to talk to anybody about your dementia-friendly community efforts and awareness building efforts. So thanks for tuning in today.
I would like to formally thank Jake and Jen and Kathy for doing a phenomenal job and preparing and coming with information and being really to assist everybody. Great job, everyone. I am going to stop the recording, and then in the chat, I'm going to put a brief evaluation. If anybody would like to help us get input on the webinar and additional topics, that'd be great. Thank you.